onward with our journey of learning about the dangers and the rewards of investing and speculating in the antiques and collectibles trade. Now, before we go any further, I've brought this book up numerous times on this channel. For those unaware, this is a book that was written in the 1980s by collectible expert Harry Rinker. My mentor at the time gave me this book, and I still have it in my collection. This book only ever had one printing. The title of this book is How to Make the Most of Your Investments in Antiques and Collectibles, the first insider's guide to manipulating the antiques and collectible markets to maximize your investment. Now, a lot of the information in this book is quite controversial. As a matter of fact, this is information that is used by the big boys, the investors, the evil investors like me, like Rudy with Alpha Investments. We all know this information. That's why you guys hate us so much. People like business owners that own grading companies, auction houses, they all know the secrets of the trade as well. Now, I want to make this clear. The information in this book, not all of it is relevant today because this book was written back in the 80s, before the internet, before social media influencers, and even YouTube existed. Most of this book, however, is pretty accurate if you really want to learn inside information as to how to maximize profits in the antiques and collectibles trade, as to how to get an edge on your competition. Even if you're an eBay thrifter or a reseller, this book could benefit you. Some of the techniques that are taught in this book are pretty much borderline sociopathic, if you know what I mean, from an economic standpoint. I mean, we're really talking about hardcore market manipulation here. Now, before I get to the crux of today's video, I just want to read you a couple of lines from one of the paragraphs in section 12 of this book that is devoted solely to market manipulation. You're going to see what I mean. Beginning in the third year of your investment plan and continuing until the final sale of your investment portfolio, your role divides into two equal parts. Continuing to build the portfolio and manipulating the antiques or collectibles market to achieve maximum gain for your portfolio. Both will remain equally important until the final sale. So you must force yourself to maintain a balance between the two. It's very interesting how this book was released with very little fanfare back in the 1980s. And really, it didn't catch on until after it was out of print. I was lucky to get a copy back then. And I remember reading this at like the age of, I think I was like 13 or 14 when I first encountered this. And even back then, I was pretty much blown away by the information contained in this book. Now that I spoke for 3 minutes on this book, what does this have to do with today's video? Well, today, we're going inside the antiques and collectibles trade. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at certain collecting markets that have a vintage side and also a relevant modern side. So if you're a Pokemon collector, if you're a video game collector, if you're a toy collector, you're probably really going to love this particular video, because what we are going to be doing, we're going to be analyzing from a risk and reward standpoint, what is better about potentially investing in the vintage side of the Pokemon market versus that of the modern era side of the Pokemon market. Or for that matter, it could be vintage versus modern era video games. It could be vintage toys versus modern era toys. Now, right now, there are certain markets in the trade that are in what is known as a speculative frenzy. I've talked about this in other videos. If you look at the Pokemon market specifically, there is a massive speculative frenzy for modern era cards at present time. And a lot of speculators are coming into this market. They're hoarding this product in mass, hoping and praying that it continues to go up in value year after year. Now, if you watch any of my other videos talking about this phenomenon, I caution a lot of these speculators that this is very risky, especially when compared to the fact that you could also be investing in vintage Pokemon cards and products. Now, there's a little bit of twist to this, because also, if you look at what's happening right now in the market for vintage Pokemon cards and the like, you're going to see that over the last couple of months, that market has also caught fire. So now if you're investing in the vintage Pokemon market or the modern era market, you're pretty much caught in a massive speculative frenzy at present time. So I do want to make that a point so that you know as we go forward out here, when we start talking about Pokemon, really no side of the trade is safe. Meaning if you are playing in that market, you are going to have to pay up if you are attempting to invest in those markets. Now, before we get too far into this video, you must understand that there are two golden rules that pretty much govern the entire antiques and collectibles trade. And I want to review this because it's been a while since I've repeated these particular mantras on this channel. First, and this is very important, demand is all that matters in the entire antiques and collectibles trade. And what you need to understand is that demand is always changing. I don't care if you're going after a coveted pop culture collectible, a scarce item, a truly quote-unquote rare item. You must understand that demand for that item is always changing, and that's all that matters. This is why if you attempt to invest in an antique or collectible over the long term, what you must properly assess is if demand is going to be greater in the future when you go to sell that item. Always remember, the entire antiques and collectibles trade is governed by the greater fool theory. There has to be someone out there that is willing to pay more for the item that you have than what you originally paid for it. Otherwise, you will never ever be able to profit from the items that you have for sale, assuming you bought them at current market value when you did buy them. And this is vital to understand. Demand matters more than rarity and supply in any antique or collectible market. I don't care if we're talking fine art. I don't care if we're talking art glass. I don't care if we're talking traditional antiques. I don't care if we're talking about the latest and greatest pop culture collectible or rare coin or vintage Star Wars figure. Whatever it is, demand matters more than rarity and supply ever will, with few exceptions. Now, the other golden mantra that you must be aware of before you even attempt to speculate or invest in these markets, you must know that collectible markets are not efficient. These are opaque markets. You must assume right from the get-go that you do not have readily available information to make an informed decision about any market you are speculating or investing in. This is how a lot of you guys out there and gals that were speculating and investing in what a great video games got burned. You assumed you had all readily available information to make an assessment that the market would constantly go higher year after year. You were proven wrong because the market was allegedly manipulated, and as a result, you did not have the correct necessary information available to make an informed, intelligent decision about the market. This is why if you watch this YouTube channel, what is it that I tell you? If you're unsure about a market, do not let FOMO, fear of missing out, eat at you. In most cases, you are better taking a step back and not doing anything at all, especially not spending or investing or speculating your hard-earned money in a market that could slap you upside the head. You need to learn this. Now, when we talk about modern era collectibles, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. Modern era collectibles are more risky than that of vintage markets because there are typically more information and price history surrounding vintage collectibles than that of modern era collectibles. So you need me to repeat that because my phone went off, unfortunately. I have no idea who is calling me right now because certain people who do call me should know I tell them when I'm recording a YouTube video so they don't call me. So most likely this was probably either a spammer or somebody that needed to get my attention and wasn't aware that I was recording a video right now. Now that I said all that, let's talk about the keys to understanding the vintage side of the collectibles trade Then we're going to compare and contrast this with talking about the modern side of the collectibles trade. So when we look at the keys to understanding the vintage side to any collectible market, you need to know that number one, prices are more stable and predictable over the long term than that of modern era collectibles. Always remember, there's years of price history if you are looking at vintage collectibles versus that of modern era collectibles. The newest that item is, the less price history you're going to have available to you. So those of you that are collecting modern era Pokemon cards, if a set just came out and you see the price spike, guess what? You're investing into the unknown. Because right now, if that item spikes higher than the manufacturer's suggested retail price, guess what? Who knows what it's going to do in the future? You only have that little bit of span of price information to base your assessment on. That's what makes investing in modern era collectibles so inherently risky over the long term. Prices are always more stable and predictable over the long term when you look at vintage collectibles for that reason. Next, if buying at current market price, vintage collectibles typically offer less opportunity for price appreciation over the short term. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's say that you have an item that's worth $1,800. And you go to the market, you're bidding it up on auction, and you put in a bid for $1,750 and you end up winning it. That's right around $1,800. You're not going to tie up $1,750 in a piece that's worth $1,800, sell it on the market just to make $50. That's completely ridiculous. So when we look at buying vintage collectibles at the current market price, they typically offer a less opportunity for price appreciation over the short term. Now, to be fair, those of you out there that run a business, maybe you have a comic book shop, maybe you have a Pokemon card store, maybe you have a vintage video game shop, people bring you stuff in and maybe you only offer them, 40, 50% of current market value for those items. You're already making money on that sale the minute you're making the purchase. You're not buying at the current market retail price. That's important to note. Another thing you got to understand, the supply of vintage collectibles is always fairly stable and consistent when compared to modern era mass-produced products with few exceptions. Now, this is important because if you're dealing in vintage graded collectibles, if the third-party grading company that grades those items offers population reports, which they should if they're a credible company, you have a unique advantage in this regard because you can gauge existing supply. Existing supply of vintage graded collectibles is fairly stable. That doesn't mean it can't change. Always remember, even as I'm sitting here speaking, right now somebody is encountering a collection of vintage Silver Age, Bronze Age comic books that have never been brought to market, that have never been graded. Somebody right now is possibly going through their grandfather's attic or basement and coming across a gold coin in uncirculated condition that has never been discovered until now. If that gets sent to one of the primary grading companies, whether it's PCGS, CAC, NGC, that coin will be included in the next update of population reports. So there are a lot of vintage items out there that are in either uncirculated, near mint condition that have yet to be graded and accounted for. But overall, the supply is pretty consistent. It's not going to change a whole lot from quarter to quarter, year to year on average, with few exceptions. Now that we talked about understanding the key fundamentals of the vintage market, let's look at the modern side of the collectibles trade. And for those of you that are putting away factory sealed modern era Nintendo Switch games or hoarding factory sealed booster boxes of modern era Pokemon cards, this is for you. Prices can be much more volatile on the secondary market for modern era collectibles than that of vintage collectibles. And this is especially true. We look at Pokemon right now. If GameStop, Best Buy, Walmart, Target end up restocking their shelves, all the Timmys, Kimmies, and Poindexters, they all go to the store and they all clear the shelves and they list the stuff on eBay. And now the true fans, the collectors, the enthusiasts that want to own those products, they now have to pay a premium over retail to get them. This is why prices can be much more volatile on the secondary market in certain cases for modern era collectibles than that of vintage. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you out there probably think the opposite is true. Well, it's true, obviously. If you're going to the store to get the latest Nintendo Switch game, or I should say Nintendo Switch 2 game, if it's a game like Donkey Kong Bonanza, no matter where you go in the United States, you're probably going to pay, what, $69.99 for that game? So the price is relatively stable. But just keep in mind, if we're talking about a market that is affected by a speculative frenzy or bubble, modern era prices are extremely volatile in this regard. Now, another thing you have working against you when you talk about investing in modern era collectibles, true supply is unknown, and certain modern era collectibles can easily be reprinted or reproduced by the manufacturer at any time. You know, during the pandemic, there was a massive speculative frenzy for modern era Nike Air Jordan sneakers and other types of sneakers that Nike made. And one of the things that the resellers got burnt with, they assumed they could keep buying these items and there was a limited supply. Well, Nike turned on the pump, pun intended, and pretty much overproduced a lot of that stuff. And that's why even today, the collectible sneaker market, at least on the modern side of the trade, is pretty much still in shambles as a result, because there's too much supply out there, and again, not enough demand. Now, the future collectability and price appreciation of modern era collectibles is always uncertain. This is something that you have to keep in mind. A lot of you guys and gals that are hoarding this stuff are looking at what happened in the past, and you're stating, well, gee, if all this stuff became valuable that was once modern, this trend is going to continue exponentially into the future. In another upcoming video, I'm going to talk about the problem with thinking that modern era products are eventually going to become vintage and what that really means. Spoiler alert, just because something is deemed vintage does not mean it's going to have value on the secondary market or be as valuable as current items are on the secondary market that are currently vintage. You have to remember, we get in my DeLorean time machine and we go back to 1998, 1999, when Pokemon first premiered in the United States. People were ripping that stuff open. They were throwing the cards in 3-ring binders. They weren't hoarding it en masse. They weren't worried about wearing gloves and sending the cards to PSA. This is why you have certain cards on the PSA census from the modern era, like a 151 Charizard card that has 23,000 copies in PSA 10 condition. And people honestly think that this particular card is still going to increase in value. It's a Charizard card from Pokemon 151 that was just recently printed. And there's already 23,000 copies in PSA 10 alone. And there's still people attempting to argue with me that the card has room to go up in value even more. This is insane. And this is why I do this channel, guys, to try to educate you on understanding how these markets work. Now, the thing that you got to be aware of, and this is why I tell you guys to sell into the hype, modern era collectibles that are in a speculative bubble or a speculative frenzy offer the greatest opportunity for immediate profit. And really, we can also apply that to vintage collectibles, like we saw with Graded Video Games. Graded Video Games entered a massive speculative bubble. And back then, what did I tell you on this channel? Sell into the hype. Don't buy into the hype. Some of you didn't listen to me, and you're still reeling from the financial fallout from those bad decisions. Others of you, you were able to recognize correctly that that is a market that you should use caution in if you are playing in that market. Speculative bubbles and speculative frenzies, whether they affect vintage collectibles or modern era collectibles, are inherently dangerous to any speculator, collector, or investor. You must be careful and watch out for those price traps. So I'm going to end the video here because I've already been speaking for 20 minutes now. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you want me to take a deeper dive into these talking points? Do you want me to go head first into the Pokemon market and specifically compare certain cards, certain sets that make up the coveted vintage era versus that of the modern era? Looking at you, Evolving Skies. Because there are set differences here. And you must know how to play these markets, when to get in and when to get out if you are going to attempt to speculate and invest in these markets. Look, I understand. A lot of you out there, you probably don't even care about the investment potential of a lot of these antiques and collectibles. I get comments all the time on this channel where people tell me, Sean, you know, I found your channel. I'm not going to subscribe. I like what you do, but honestly, I don't care about the investment potential of the antiques and collectibles I'm buying. I understand that, but I'm going to look directly at the camera and I'm going to say this. The people that are your competition, who are also going after this stuff, they know the investment potential of these markets. And if you don't understand the pitfalls, the risks, and the potential rewards of operating in these markets, you can lose a lot of money in your quest to create the perfect collection. That's why I teach the basics that make up investing in these markets, whether it be over the short term or over the long term. So if you want to learn more about how these markets work, how they operate, consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. And if possible, I just may see you in another upcoming video.